couple of months ago, Brother Mike Daniels was kind enough to come, and he did a precursor on the theory of Marshal Ney, one of Napoleon's field marshals, not having been executed because he was a Freemason. What this is, that precursor, this is really before what Brother Daniels was talking about and how it all came together involving Marshal Ney and the Napoleonic Wars. The Napoleonic Wars in that era, when Napoleon was the ruler of pretty much most of Europe, affected the lives of millions of people around the world, not just in Europe. We're talking about the early 1800s and how many of the major players were members of our fraternity. We've got Marshal Ney, we got Duke of Wellington, we have Marshal Blucher. And oh, by the way, around right before the Battle of Waterloo, when all this culminates on a field in Belgium, where we're going to go this evening, there's a slight thing going on too, the War of 1812 with the United States. The only time the capital of the United States was burned by the British. So the British have their hands full. They're the superpower of the day. They're fighting the French. They're fighting a lot of other nations, and they come across the ocean and burn the capital. So there's a lot going on in the early 1800s. Let's talk about the players upon the field at Waterloo. The first player we're going to talk about is Arthur Wellesley. Now, most people never heard of Arthur Wellesley, Brother Arthur Wellesley. You know him better by the title of the Duke of Wellington. He was the son of an upper middle class Irish family. He graduated from Eton and a French military academy. I always thought that was ironic, he being a British fellow. He purchased his officer's commission, which was not unusual. You bought your commission if you had money. His father was in the Parliament. His brother was a lord and got Wellington appointed to a command in India, where he staked his claim to fame in defeating the Indian troops trained by the French. He did quite well there. In 1807, he was a member of the Parliament, but he gives up that position, and the military duties start back again, and France and England's always fighting one another to control Europe. He defeated a Danish force. Now we have the Danes fighting against the British as well, helping the French. And he led the British army against the French and Spanish forces in Portugal. For 5 years, Wellington, Brother Wellington, led the English forces and finally defeated the French in Spain and Portugal. Well, Napoleon was defeated, and he abdicated. He gave up. Now, Napoleon was not, as some people think, a member of our fraternity. Napoleon was very friendly towards Freemasonry. His brother Joseph was a brother, yet Napoleon himself was not a brother. But he gave preference treatment to the fraternity, which was very nice. Napoleon abdicates, he leaves, peace comes back into Europe for just a short time. The third month of 1815, Napoleon comes back to the throne, and Europe is shattered again by war. Napoleon had never met Wellington on the field. That's about to change at the Battle of Waterloo, the field in Belgium. Initially, Napoleon's old magic worked. He defeated the Prussian army. Now, there is no united Germany at that time. You've got different states in Germany, Bavaria, Hanover, but the Prussians are the premier military force into what's to become Germany later. Well, we fast forward on in regards to Waterloo, and on Sunday, June 18th, Wellington positioned his army defensively upon ground near the crossroads village of Waterloo in Belgium. He was able to hold off Napoleon, but the battle held by a thread. The Battle of Waterloo, involving three brothers, Wellington, Marshal Ney, and the Prussian Blucher, started at 11:30 a.m. on a Sunday morning and would not conclude until about 7:30. Of the 140,000 men, the troops that were engaged, over half were killed or wounded in that one day. It was grisly, terrible. When Napoleon was winning the battle, and things were going quite well, but then the Belgian countryside saw black uniforms, and they thought maybe it was French reinforcements, but it was the Prussians coming across to help and to win the day for Wellington. Brother Wellington did quite well. He rose, he became the Prime Minister of England, and he was heralded as one of Britain's greatest generals. Now, let's talk about the other brother involved in this battle, one you hardly ever hear of, Gerhard von Blücher. He was an older fellow. He was a Prussian. He was trained by the Swedish, and he also joined the Prussians to fight against the Germans, the Napoleonic Wars. He was defeated time and time again. He withdrew from his command, but he always came back. He would live to be 72 years of age. He cursed like a sailor. He was in good standing in the fraternity, and he never asked his troops to do anything he wouldn't do. He drank and he smoked a pipe, and because he was so old, he always called his soldiers, my children. My children is what he called the soldiers because of the age difference. Now, let us focus on Michel Ney, Napoleon's field marshal, and what Mike Daniels had talked about, the possibility of Brother Ney coming to North Carolina. Michel Ney was the son of a barrel maker, big wooden barrels. When he was 18, he enlisted as a private in the cavalry. He was known as Ginger because he had bright red hair. He was very distinguished. He had a volatile temper. He was promoted to general at the age of 27. It's interesting, Napoleon, Ney, and Wellington were all born in the same year, 1769. They were all the same age of 46 during the battle. That was unique. And Blucher was the old man in his 70s. It was quite interesting. Well, Ney does quite well. He rises up, and when Napoleon abdicates his first time, and the French get their king back, Louis XVIII, Ney serves the king. It's ironic about Field Marshal Ney. It's listed that he fought in at least 500 skirmishes and battles, one man, and never fought against his native country of France. When Napoleon gave up his power, politics power, Napoleon went into exile, he served the king and served his country again. When Napoleon would escape his exile at Elba, he came back with less than 1,000 men, and he landed on the French coast. The king sent Marshal Ney to arrest his former commander, Napoleon Bonaparte. And what Brother Daniels imparted to us is true. When you check the records, Ney told the king, I will bring him back in an iron cage. He marched his troops, about 10,000, to meet Napoleon's less than 1,000. The men surrendered over to Napoleon. Ney threw down his sword. Napoleon picked it up and said, follow me. And Ney once again became Napoleon's bravest of the brave, as he had called him. When they fought in Russia together, you may recall from history, the French army was devastated in Russia. Ney fought the entire rear action to save what was left of the army, and that's when he was given the title, the bravest of the brave. At the conclusion of the Battle of Waterloo, for Napoleon to be able to escape being captured, he also set up the rear action in that as well. So, after the battle, the British and the Prussians are victorious over Napoleon. Ney is on Napoleon's staff. They've been defeated once again. Napoleon flees, goes into exile. The king comes back, but this time he has Ney arrested. And he's imprisoned. And he's sentenced to death for treason. Never fought against his own country, but tried and convicted of treason against France. On December 7th, 1815, he was shot, purportedly giving the order to fire himself. It's interesting, when the firing squad lined up and Ney was shot, which direction would you think your body would fall? Backwards. He fell forward. No one could figure that out. The plot thickens when many people think that members of the fraternity, up to including Arthur Wellesley, the Duke of Wellington, was involved to perhaps they faked his death so he could escape. Well, we have a fellow that shows up in the United States by the name of Peter Stewart Ney. He immigrated to North Carolina and taught school in North Carolina and South Carolina. He was even tied in as he designed the seal for Davidson College. They still use it to this very day. He died in his 70s, 77, and he's buried in Rowan County at the Third Creek Presbyterian Church. And it's interesting, when you visit his grave, as some of us have, that'd be a great field trip, by the way, if you've never been, there's usually a bottle of cognac, and there's always a little French flag. And this fellow did confess that he had been one of Napoleon's marshals. So the mystery goes on. It's quite interesting. Peter Ney, Arthur Wellesley, and Blücher were all key players in deciding the fate of Europe and perhaps part of the world by the French being defeated upon the field in Belgium at Waterloo. There's an interesting sidebar, too, about Freemasonry. We continue on just to throw it in a little bit. Wellington's brother-in-law, General Parkingham, was a member of the fraternity, too. And around this same time, you may remember, we were fighting the war against the British, the War of 1812. And you've heard of the Battle of New Orleans. The war was actually over. But they didn't have cable TV and they didn't have mobile phones. And Brother Andrew Jackson was not aware that the battle was over. The war was over. General Parkingham, Brother Parkingham, and his British army landed in New Orleans. And they were killed. Parkingham was Wellington's brother-in-law. He too was a member of the fraternity, as was Andrew Jackson. Small world. So I'd recommend sometimes perhaps you take a field trip, get the members of your lodge, go to that Third Creek Presbyterian Church just off of Highway 70 near the small town of Cleveland, North Carolina in Rowan County, and you can see the grave there today that's been perfectly preserved. And the mystery will continue about Brother Peter Ney, Marshal Ney. Thank you very much.